Thank you. Ooh, that was ahead. Hi, everyone. Okay, thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to talk about why design systems fail. But it's a very positive talk, I promise. It really does go along with this theme. So here's tonight's theme, empowering product growth with design systems. I think understanding what could prevent a design system from being successful is a really big part of doing this growth empowerment. You have to make sure that your design system is being used and adopted in order to make sure that this product is growing. So as Diana said, I have a little bit of experience with design systems, and so I've learned a lot of lessons along the way. I started working in design systems originally when they were just called pattern libraries, and this whole component library thing didn't catch on yet back in DC when I was working in startup land. And then I moved over to Watson, where I worked on the Watson design system, the first iteration of that. Then I worked on the Bluemix design system. I kind of switched teams within IBM, which is now the Carbon design system. It's grown a lot since then. They have a lot of really cool tools coming out. And I'm currently working at DigitalOcean as a UI engineer on our design system iteration, which is called Buoy, the second version of Buoy. So I feel like this talk is kind of a culmination of some of the things I learned. I'm sorry if I go over my time, but there's so much I want to say to you all. So this is kind of the problem. Within all of those companies, I've seen multiple design system iterations that kind of try to call themselves the single source of truth. At DigitalOcean, we kind of have 3 of these floating around, and they all have very clever names, I think, especially Float, because floats get it. It doesn't have any floats in it. But it's important to remember when you think about this and how many different iterations there can be of this very serious and true XKCD comic. The situation is there are 14 competing standards. 14, ridiculous. We need to develop one universal standard that covers everyone's use case. The new situation is there are 15 competing standards. So I only have 10 minutes kind of to talk about all this stuff. If you have questions about why some of those decisions were made, let's talk after this. There are some legitimate reasoning behind that. People have thought this through. But the real thing that I want to talk about here is if there is a design system already, why aren't people using it? What's the problem there? So when I first started at DO working on design systems, I did a little bit of an audit of our existing code base. This is the cloud dashboard. And I found that not only did we have these like really crazy selectors going on, the CSS that we were sending in our design system was 96 kilobytes, which isn't the worst. But that was only 27% of the total CSS that we were sending in cloud, which means that CSS overrides and additional components were the bulk of the code that we were sending. Like, people weren't using the design system. I found that there were 57 unique font sizes, which was a fun fact, 14 Z indices, 121 unique color declarations, 19 unique font family declarations. I don't know why. So there's room for improvement. But more importantly, I wanted to know why this happened. Why were people adding on and not using the existing system, which had been around for about 2 years at the time? So I think that understanding this is kind of the critical point in the discussion of how we can then scale the products to grow. Because if we don't allow for the system to become successful, we don't get to take advantage of all the benefits of design systems. So, happy design systems scale good standards. They build in accessibility from the start. They unify component style and code. And they also reduce code cruft as well as speed up product delivery. Like, this is the happy path, right? So why wouldn't people use a design system that exists that helps them with all of these things? Well, the answer is simple. We're all being judged on different things. So most people aren't being judged on clean code. The engineers that we're building this for are being judged on their ability to build product and ship features quickly. That's just the way it is. We can argue about that for days. They want to get a raise. They are doing their job the best they can. And if it doesn't, help them out, they're not going to try to learn a new system. They're just trying to build quickly. So you have to separate the fact that your OKRs, if your OKR is keeping a clean, unified system, is not somebody else's OKR. Everything you need to do to build a good design system for this to happen has to always focus around your user and making sure that their use case and their needs are kind of put first. So let's get started at 5 things that we can do to keep a successful design system alive and going. The first thing is really investment, and this can kind of come from an organizational level. To have a successful design system, you need to make continuous effort to put resources into it and to keep putting resources into it. I think of this kind of like working out, right? Small incremental investments can lead to big gains overall. But if you have some short sprint cycle, if you work out for 3 months, or if you build a design system in 3 months and then you stop maintaining it, you're going to see those gains pretty quickly fade away, right? People will stop using it as designs change, and then you'll find yourself having to do another large iteration just to not want to work on it anymore because it's so out of sync and it's so out of shape. Like, we've all been there. And because of how they scale, this can be a really big problem, especially with things like accessibility. Design systems allow you to really build that in from the beginning, but if you don't, you could be counterproductive and actually make it harder for you to go back and do those revisions. So when you are building design systems, it's important to think about how they scale, build in accessibility, and make sure you're thinking about those things from the start. And what really helps with this is having some kind of ownership. So having a person or a team that owns design systems. And that's one really good way to ensure that there is investment and continuous investment in your design system. That's then scaling to the rest of your organization. So once you have the resources and investment and plan to invest in this design system, it's really important that this person or team acts as a bridge between the design and engineering teams and is really working in between those. And I know that in this day and age, that's a really difficult place to be because companies don't really know what to do with hybrids, but hybrids are really great people to work on the design systems because they do kind of have that background, they understand. And so continuous communication is really important here. Remember that nobody wants to be told what to do or prescribed a solution, especially developers. Because developers, we're used to choosing our own tool sets, choosing our own text editors, choosing what our entire setup looks like. So if you're prescribing a solution to somebody, they're going to kind of shut down. That's just the first psychological reaction they're going to have. And they're not going to want to listen to you when you're saying this is the design system that you have to use from now on. So even despite how much control the other engineers have over the design system, it's important to make them feel like they have control. It's important to make them feel heard and listened to. Like, if you've ever heard the idea of perceived performance being important to your user, kind of how people feel, how fast the page loads, this is about perceived involvement. So ask questions. Listen to your user, that's your developers, and then really make your user feel heard. When I took on this rebuilding of our design system, I did a lot of user interviews and just sat and talked with our front-end developers, gaining rapport, just so that they felt involved, and I feel like that's made a massive difference in adoption. So for all the reasons I just went over, good communication is really important to also get buy-in from your users. You need to get buy-in from not just engineers, but also product management, designers across the board, across your entire team, because it is such a horizontal product that you're creating. It's a lot of people ops, which you don't really expect when you go into this. You think, oh, I'm going to build this great technical system, but it's a lot more people management than you might realize. And the next talk that Gina is doing is all about that, so I'm excited to hear more. A really good way to kind of have someone buy into your product is to show them and not tell them, to make this a path of least resistance for their own products, and then let them use it. So if you can, have developers use your product in a low-stakes situation where it provides clear benefits. Hackathons are a really great place to debut your design system. If your company has an internal hackathon, this is a great opportunity for you. DigitalOcean recently had one, and I found that this hackathon was a really perfect opportunity to, one, evangelize the design system, to tell people that it exists, to get that on their radar, all the engineers across the company, which is about, I want to say, around like 150 at this point, just everywhere. Our team is really remote, too, so this was an important opportunity to let them know that this existed. The second thing was we were able to see how people use the design system. So it was really great user testing that was kind of free. It just kind of happens. And then afterward, we were able to do some interviewing to get feedback. And that feedback was really vital in the decisions that we made as we grew this design system and moved forward with it. After the hackathon, more people had heard about Buoy, and so the word spread. And this is one of my favorite moments that happened a few weeks after the hackathon. Totally unsolicited. One of our engineers, Tom, submitted this pull request where he decided, we have a design system, why am I using Bootstrap? So he was able to get rid of 20,000 lines of code and only had to write about 60 lines of code to make his Ghost admin panel look the way he wanted it to look. And it was a cohesive UI with the rest of our products. So this was awesome to see. It's like these kinds of moments where people get to explore on their own see the use of it, get excited about it, that's what's helping their product scale and grow. That's where they're seeing the benefits. And that's where they're going to tell the rest of the teams and the rest of the engineers they work with about that experience. So this is really exciting. Speaking of seeing products scale and grow, build it so it can grow. Having a solid architecture here is really, really important. I kind of work on the engineering side of things as opposed to what you were talking about with the design side of things, so I do want to talk about NPM for a second. But I found that especially if you're working on existing product, you can't just create a new design system. You have to make sure that you're namespacing things so that they don't collide. That's a big deal. So make sure that you keep that in mind. Or you use a framework that will do that for you. So a lot of component frameworks out there now will take care of namespacing your components and their styles. Also, versioning can make a really big difference. I've used semantic versioning on all of the design systems that I have worked on to date. Semantic versioning uses major, minor, and patch as a naming structure for any updates. So once you do this, you can then tag releases on GitHub, which means that when people use your design system, usually through NPM, that's kind of the popular way nowadays, they can just put a hash at the end of it so they have whatever assets are from that release version. So we also use the semantic versioning now to link our code assets to our design assets. And we use a craft library that allows for the assets to be in sync between Sketch and code. So, when it started, if the Sketch library is catching up to the code, you can kind of see that version slowly tick up. And then if the design assets kind of move ahead of the code, that will eventually catch up. So we also have built CDN assets, which we'll talk about in a second. And those also, what we're doing is we're sending deploys out based on every single version. So if people want to use this design system just from the static assets, they can grab whatever version, like max CDN style, have the tagged version number. So if we make a breaking change, it doesn't break their code base. And this has been really important. And this is really good just sort of habit to have when you're building design systems specifically. The last thing I want to talk about to kind of wrap this up is reducing friction. It kind of sums up those other points about empathy, communication, and thinking about your user when building a design system. You have to make this design system the path of least resistance. And that means lowering cognitive overhead instead of adding to it. We all have our biases. We all have our own ways of developing or designing things. But those ways don't really matter as much as the user's ways of thinking about what they're building. And you're going to have different users. So a really good idea is to provide options here. For us with Buoy, option one is building this design system into the product through SaaS. So you have to change your developer environment. What that allows is you to only build out the components that you're using through a component list. It allows you to use a hook-based architecture to extend upon components, and you get really clean, performant code output. So that's really exciting and well and good, but not everybody wants to set this up in that way. They don't want to change their dev environment. They don't know SaaS. They don't want to use those variables. The second way that we do this is by providing the built assets so that people can just drop it in, update their classes, and then they have the design system presented the way they want. This is definitely a lesson I learned when I was working at IBM on the Bluemix design system because, we're in our bubble, we have our assumptions, and we're working on those assumptions, but when we gave it to our user, they were like, this is too hard for me, I don't want to use this, I'm just going to use Bootstrap like I'm used to. You have to think about what they want, and that's kind of the whole point of this. How to empower product growth with design systems. I hope that these lessons and tidbits kind of showed you that a design system is only as effective as its adoption. And through investment, communication, buy-in, solid architecture, and removing friction, you can get developers excited to use your design system. It's easier for them to use. They're going to be excited to use it, which empowers them to build quickly and efficiently, and that's really how everyone wins. Thank you.